past. And because it's the past, it'll be in the history books and kids will read it. That is the official the lie about 9/11. And I thought, in order to try and prevent that, we've got to have an event on the 10th anniversary, which will say, this isn't over, this is just beginning. This is just beginning.
We have gathered here at Ryerson University in Toronto for the international hearings on the events of September 11th. In Toronto for the international hearings on the events of September 11th, 2001. And only summarized here in the briefest manner. The events of 9/11 have served as a cause or pretext for two major wars, producing incalculable suffering in Iraq and Afghanistan, and increasing instability throughout the Middle East.
In Canada, let us add, there are parallel grounds for public debate and formal hearings. 2,000 Canadians were among the direct victims of the 9/11 attack. 6 times that number of Canadian soldiers were in the longest running of the 9/11 wars. And the kettling and mass arrests of more than 1,000 peaceful demonstrators at last year's G20 protests in Toronto,
you can watch the screen on the video.
with the actions of a disorderly minority, was one sign of the extent to which civil liberties have declined in post 9/11 Canada.
Almost
The
in the
importance of
movie.
9/11 as a historic turning point, then, is not in doubt. But much of what happened on that day, in the period leading up to it, and in its immediate aftermath, remains in doubt, in terms most particularly of the agencies and causalities involved in that sequence of events. Our 4-day hearings, then, will thus have a quasi-judicial structure. The presentations of the expert witnesses will be evidence-based, rather than speculative. The methodologies involved, whether those of the physical or the social sciences, will be rigorous, and the information that the witnesses present will receive a further critical sifting at the hands of the panelists, both in the questions they put to witnesses and also subsequently in their final report.
We all know what we saw, but we don't know what happened. But scientists have a distinct view of what happened because of their professional background. And so it's meaningful when you get scientists, architects, engineers, the entire conglomeration of the community that has looked at what we saw and studied it to the scientific method.
In general, the hearings are intended to bring attention to the most substantial evidence that has accumulated over the last 10 years, evidence that the 9/11 Commission report and the various reports issued by the National Institute of Standards and Technology failed to adequately address, which demonstrates that there is a need for a new, independent, and international investigations into the events of 9/11. The hearings are not a new investigation in themselves. The hearings will provide a succinct summary of the strongest evidence that a new investigation is immediately warranted, and that the international community cannot abdicate this responsibility any longer. The format and conduct of the hearings will be analogous to, though not exactly the same as, a legal proceeding, a criminal proceeding that is known in the United States as a grand jury hearing. The analogy between the Toronto hearings and a grand jury proceeding is not perfect because there are some differences in format and product of the Toronto hearings. The hearings are not being conducted according to any specific laws or legal procedures, and the outcome will not have the force of law. Instead of convening a traditional jury panel, we decided to gather together an international panel of prominent individuals who have agreed to do what governments and major media outlets around the world have so far refused to do: look at the evidence objectively and decide whether it deserves wider attention. In selecting panelists, someone who is, 1, highly credible, and 2, open to objectively assessing the evidence.
Ferdinando Antonomato is the honorary president of the Supreme Court of Italy. As a former senator, he presided over major political assassinations. former senator who served on the Commission, 7 books on international terrorism, state corruption, and related matters.
I can't
He is also a Grand Officer of the Order of Merit of the
probably getting out of line.
Herbert Jenkins, a professor emeritus of psychology at McMaster University, worked in major research laboratories before coming to McMaster in 1963. An influential figure both in the psychology of learning and judgment, and also in the development of new forms of interdisciplinary curricula that have been widely imitated in other Canadian universities.
Look on this fine.
He was awarded
That
an
was
honorary doctorate from McMaster University in 2009 in recognition of his impact in both fields. David Johnson is a professor emeritus of urban and regional planning at the University of Tennessee. A fellow of the American Institute of Certified Planners, he served on the staffs of the Boston Redevelopment Authority, the Washington National Capital Planning Commission, and the Regional Plan Association of New York. The former chair of the planning departments at Syracuse University and at Ball State University, he is also the past president
Yeah.
of the Fulbright Association of the United States.
You gonna
Richard
have?
Lee, our fourth panelist, is a distinguished professor emeritus of anthropology at the University of
You want
Toronto.
to say anything?
The Royal Society of Canada, a foreign
recording
honorary
again.
member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and a foreign associate of the National Academy of Sciences. He has served as president of the Canadian Anthropology Society and the Canadian Ethnology Society, and holds honorary doctorates from the University of Fairbanks, Alaska, and the University of Guelph.
Over the course of 4 days, the panel will listen to evidence that has been collected over the last 10 years that contradicts the official government version of events. Each witness will present an opening statement and then answer questions posed by the panel. The panel has been given considerable latitude in the subject and nature of the questions they may ask. And we expect the witnesses to answer
Yeah.
the question to the best of their knowledge.
Fucking when you're
After
on,
the
when
hearings
you're
are adjourned on the
on
fourth
business.
day, the panel will reconvene over the
Oh,
following weeks and
panel.
months
I want
and
to
make
look
a
at
decision
it.
on which aspects, if any, of the evidence presented deserves further investigation by governments with the subpoena. and
I'll
political
talk to you
power.
later.
The panel will then publish a final report, which I will help draft and edit, setting forth a recitation of the evidence presented and the panel's conclusions regarding the strength of the evidence and recommendations on how to proceed.
The information that we receive from really all sorts of media, with the exception of the alternate media, the internet, seems to be just kind of telling us the same story over and over again, but they really can't address the hard questions that are out there. They will say, they being those that support the official story, that, well, all those questions have been answered. There's books out there. Well, they've all been answered. Surely they've all been answered. But when you read those books and when you get into those questions, you find that they have not been answered.
This is what we're talking about at the Toronto hearing, presenting this evidence to the distinguished panel and packaging it. I'm very excited to be a part of it and to hear the other distinguished panelists discuss the other aspects of the extremely explosive destruction of the Twin Towers, including nanothermal explosives found in all the World Trade Center dust.
People that read this material and it's looked into it realize the official account is can't withstand scrutiny. It's just full of errors and contradictions, gaps.
We sit over here and you watch the big screen.
Responsible parties. The political class of the United States is basically,
We're gonna have a rhythm.
you can't talk about it, much less do anything about it. So I was bringing it to Canada and bringing everybody together and trying to put it on.
I wanna see how long it'll,
Section
I wanna see how long the video, right? Oh man, but then how long the video?
this issue, because that's all we have to do is get people to take a look at it. I've been interviewed a lot, especially recently in connection with the hearings, and the media have been told, I suppose, for 10 years that conspiracy theories turn to use, and that's why we don't interview these people much, and that's how we're going to discourage them when we do interview them. It hasn't worked very well for them recently, because if that's what you've done for 10 years, instead of looking into it, instead of thinking about it, the most you've been able to come up with is the term conspiracy theory, then when you're finally confronted with a whole bunch of intelligent people together, and they just dismiss that as BS. What do you mean conspiracy theory? Let's talk about it. Then it turns out you don't know anything. You don't have anything else to say. So one interviewer after another on the phone has been speechless once you explain that conspiracy theory label is useless. They have nothing else to say.
Conspiracy theory is a way of trying to discredit inquiry. I mean, it's perfectly legitimate to say here is a very, very serious event that occurred. It killed thousands of people right off the bat. It's killing firefighters still today. It's used to justify war. It's killed thousands of American soldiers. It's killed millions of Iraqis and Afghanis. It's literally in the millions. And to consider that investigating the roots of that is somehow not legitimate, or that you have to be somehow psychologically impaired, some sort of conspiratorial thinking. We're trying to psychologize all this, where people can dismiss people who even ask these questions. I think it's being a responsible citizen to ask questions of your government and not just take what they say without any kind of critical thought.
That's what they have to do. We're crazy nuts who don't know our feet from our hands, and we're very dangerous. So much so that they held us inside the U.S. government to deal with conspiracy theories. This is where William Faulkner is in the business of telling people not to listen to conspiracy theories.
They can't answer the question, so what else can they do? When you're getting difficult questions, of course, when a smart person that's asking those questions, if you can't answer those questions, and I think the nice thing about national hearings today is that anybody who looks at it will realize that we're not walking in there with tinfoil hats. We're ordinary citizens who are concerned and trying to do something about it. They're not irrational people who have not been answered.
We're putting our reputations on the line, speaking publicly about an unpopular subject. And all we're asking is that we be taken seriously and that the evidence be looked at.
I think we face an uphill battle in our effort to establish a real inquiry into the horrific events. And a necessary part of that battle was advanced in our 4 days of hearings. We have focused on the strongest evidence and reasoned arguments that the official account of 9/11 is not true. Any open-minded person, in my view, who genuinely seeks the truth and is willing to examine the evidence would support a real inquiry. With the power to subpoena witnesses and with the political clout to pry loose from a secretive government, evidence are managed to suppress. We really want to begin a long process of rebuilding trust in the democratic state. And the only way it can be done within the law, by opening the government to the legitimate needs of its citizens to know and to see and to be heard. We should be a movement to rebuild trust through real inquiry. To bring about a rebirth of democracy and trust in the United States, this must be done in and by the people and some part of the state together.
It occurred to me as I tried to put forward to questioners in the last couple of days that because of the collapse of these three towers, there must be massive changes to the building codes in the United States of America. And I'm kind of willing to bet that there aren't any. And I kind of think that that is something that we definitely should definitely be explored. Why aren't there changes in the building codes? The towers collapsed. According to the recognized authorities, this is how they collapse. So what's happening in the building codes? One of the retarded devices used by the official story is to say that we critics are showing disrespect for the dead. And on the contrary, it seems really important to say that by
really seeking the true sources of their tragedy, of their deaths, we are showing real respect for them and not crying crocodile tears.
The panel decided to present a formal charge to the General Prosecutor of the United States and the Prosecutor of New York City against the unknown responsible of the above indicated action further than crash of airplanes. And to this regard, the Toronto hearing panel asked for further technical and scientific investigation by independent and impartial expert appointed by competent USA magistrate in respect of the review of due process of law. This panel trusts the United States justice and in the United States willingness to accept the truth. Nevertheless, if the inert and careless behavior should continue, we would be obliged to start legal proceedings before the International Criminal Court of Hague, according to Article 7 of the COUT statute. This article establishes the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court for the crimes against humanity as the 9th event of September. The International Criminal Court has been established in order to watch over the world of people against the crimes committed out of the declared wars. It is not a question of interference, but of justice and solidarity.
I want to say that I am a proud and patriotic American U.S. citizen. I served in the military. I've been a federal employee. I've represented the United States as a Fulbright scholar in 4 countries. And I think my country has a proud history, but not all of it, but much of it. And we've done some wonderful things. So I have not given up on my country. I was at the original hearings when the Twin Towers were proposed in New York as a city plan in 1960, I think it was 67 or 68. And I supported the building of the Twin Towers proposed by David Rockefeller to keep the financial district in the downtown. It was migrating north, and that's why it was built. I supported it because I felt it made good planning sense, and there was I was well aware of the internal structure of this building, very interesting structure, unique, eventually. I had done work in structural engineering. My first degree was in architecture. And so when I saw the videos of the collapse of the building, I said, something's fishy here. This was in 2002. It was very early. And I talked to people about it, and they looked at me and rolled their eyes and said, Senator Fulbright, who was one of my heroes, he wrote in a book called The Arrogance of Power, I do not think for a moment that America, with her deeply rooted democratic traditions, is likely to embark upon a campaign to dominate the world in the manner of a Hitler or Napoleon. What I do fear is that she may be drifting into commitments which, though generous and benevolent in intent, are so far-reaching as to exceed even America's great capacities. At the same time, it is my hope, and I emphasize it because it underlies all of the criticisms and proposals I make here, that America will escape those fatal temptations of power which have ruined other great nations, and will instead confine herself to doing only that good in the world which she can do, both by direct effort and by the force of her own example. Fulbright went on to write another book, which he titled The Price of Empire. And in it he said, the price of empire is America's soul, and that is too high a price. Thank you.
We are gathering together to demand a real investigation that accounts for all of this evidence, that uses the scientific method relative to its examination, that uses immunity to bring forth witnesses, and takes testimony under oath. That'll be a real investigation. And we don't know who is capable of performing that yet. That's beyond our area of expertise. But we hope the Toronto hearings will aid us toward that end.
I look forward to the day that there can be a real, legitimate, transparent, independent court review of the information that is being put forward at this tribunal and the work of others who have done the necessary investigation.
There's a lot of people that are easily manipulated because all they basically have is a stereotypical value system that's dished out by the media.
The average person goes to their newspaper and reads their local magazine and listens to their news. It's very hard to get people to break a habit that's been inbred in them for the last, ever since they were born. So it's a difficult task. I think the alternate media, the internet, is an absolute critical part of this whole thing.
I mean, the news shows are a farce. Don't get your news from TV. Turn off your TV. Get your news from other sources.
I believe in human curiosity and human intelligence, and there's a limit to how long people can go on thinking that one bullet inflicted 7 wounds on 2 different people in the presidential car in Dallas in 1963. That sort of thing slowly becomes ridiculous because of what's been called paradigm shift. It's not like we persuade the older generation died. And then you have a new generation whose minds are being distorted by the propaganda campaigns.
Would you have any advice for say, a young person who's inspired, hungry for truth, and looking to make a difference?
Yeah, I would just, watch the people that seem to be making a difference today. There are alternative journalists out there, if that's what you're interested in, if that's what your talents lie, where your talents lie. That's an incredibly important part. We, frankly, it appears, need to build a new media. It's critically important for the future. So we need people to have the courage and take the steps necessary, make the sacrifices necessary to build that media, take the risks. And if that happens, I think that we're going to make a lot of progress in the future.
Well, I guess the first thing is think for yourself. Don't believe something because Peter Dale Scott said it, and certainly don't believe something because the New York Times said it. But trust in your own ability, not just to understand what has been said so far, but if you have the curiosity, go a little further, get into the primary records, and discover something new that nobody else has ever discovered before. That's relatively easy to do in this field because there's so much pressure on people not to conduct this kind of research. But if you become independent and do it, you may find something which will contribute to the record.
You need to wake up. You need to look at what's really going on, not just the myth, the propaganda.
I guess if I was speaking to young people right now, I'd say your youth, your physical youth, is a transient thing. We barely get the chance to realize we're young when we look in the mirror and realize we're not young anymore. So, enjoy your youth, but that's not gonna do it for you in your life. You've got to come up with something that's more substantial. And please don't buy into all the stuff about your career, and that's the biggest thing in life. Truth is important, goodness is important, compassion is important, helping this planet is important, and don't hesitate to give your life to that, your energy to that.
When I ponder the horrendous crimes of 9/11, I likewise feel sick to my stomach. It's a different sickness, but every bit as much vertigo-inducing as has been given testimony to. Human consciousness eventually assimilated the pertinence of gravity and made peace with what it meant, once a heresy against ultimate authority, although it was, and we moved on. Institutions were erected that one way or another gave testament to the witness of science about gravity. And have no mistake about it, we have been a witness to science here these last few days. Each of these witnesses, with a score of others doing likewise here, stepped from privileged place into the auger of history. Like Galileo, they glimpsed the redemption that God, him, her, itself, willing, others might someday do likewise, made the mysteries explicable to us all. When the mass media and every other institution of the land are willing to play along with contemporary laws of the universe, we've got more fundamental problems. In the late Middle Ages, so-called scholastic philosophers confronted with mounting evidence for a world governed some other way than had for so long been accepted, preoccupied themselves with the relevance of angels dancing on pinheads, as if that was the most relevant consideration for them to sort through. I'd like to take solace in some positive headlines in the next few days, glimpse some sort of confirmation that the beautifully shameless testaments made here have made it past the matrix sentinels for the time being. I know that headlines will never be enough. I think all of us know that. But one thing I know for certain, although so many of them want free people thinking otherwise, we who are free are not lone wolves, not now, not ever. Something other than physical laws binds us together now, us who gave witness to these testaments here, so wonderfully done. We might be exiles from the matrix of received wisdom from a pliant media, but as Morpheus in the film story The Matrix said, we are still here. Here's to hoping soon for a world full of exiles. Thank you.
Thank you for continuing on the path to seeking the truth on the 10th anniversary of 9/11 and for inviting me to speak to you. My name is Lori Van Auken. On September 11, 2001, my husband Kenneth went to work at Cantor Fitzgerald in the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Ken was on the 105th floor of Tower 1 when American Airlines Flight 11 hit his building. He left a message that began with "I love you" and went on to let me know that he had felt the building get hit by something. Ken didn't know if he would get out. Essentially, he was calling to say goodbye. I knew that my husband had survived the initial strike, but that's all I knew. While I sat in utter shock from what I was watching on television, I continued to hope for a glimpse of Ken somewhere in the chaos of people running and jumping from buildings. At some point, President Bush was shown sitting in an elementary school class listening to a story about a pet goat. This footage was in a split screen with a video of the World Trade Center that had smoke billowing from a plane-shaped hole. I clearly remember trying to will Mr. Bush to get up and do something. But even after Andrew Card whispered something in his ear, he just continued to sit there. That was my first clue that something was not quite right. Shouldn't the commander-in-chief have a more important job to do while planes are crashing into the World Trade Center than listening to an elementary school class reading lesson? Wasn't the President of the United States himself a potential terrorist target? I thought of my own kids and worried that the children in that Florida school were in harm's way if President Bush was a target. As I continued watching the most unbelievable drama I had ever seen, the World Trade Center building started crumbling and crashing to the ground. The building that was hit first, my husband's building, remained standing as the South Tower, which was hit second, fell. I thought, how did the South Tower get hit in the top corner of the building without that piece of the building falling away from the rest of the structure as you would expect it to? Suddenly, Ken's building exploded into dust as I watched, and people tried to run away from the gigantic wall of smoke and debris that seemed to follow them down the street. Really? Steel frame skyscrapers could disintegrate just like that? As the news spread, our friends and family members seemed to appear from nowhere to sit with us while we waited for the news about Ken's whereabouts and condition. That first night, I got almost no sleep and made hundreds of phone calls to New York City and New Jersey hospitals, as well as the Red Cross, hoping to find my husband alive somewhere. We didn't find out how much our lives would change until 2 days later, when Howard Lutnick, the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, appeared on TV. That's when we learned that Ken didn't get out, that no one in the building above the impact of the airplane had gotten out alive. The sadness and horror that shrouded my family after September 11th cannot possibly be conveyed to you. Before long, the gnawing questions started overwhelming me. I wasn't eating or sleeping very much, and instead, I found myself hunched over my computer in my basement, reading and researching every 9/11 related article that I could get my hands on. Mindy Kleinberg and I live in the same town, and our husbands work for the same company, but we had never met prior to September 11, 2001. Right after the tragedy, a mutual friend introduced us. Mindy and I began attending a support group that the families affected by Pan Am 103 Lockerbie had set up for the 9/11 families. There we met Bob Minetti, who had lost a child in the crash of Pan Am 103. At another meeting for 9/11 victims' family members, we became acquainted with Patty Casaza and Kristen Breitweiser. We began emailing each other about questions we had. Soon we would learn that there would be only a congressional investigation and only into the intelligence failures that led to 9/11. But by then we knew that every governmental agency had failed us on September 11. NORAD, the FAA, DOJ, etc., in addition to the FBI, CIA, and NSA. We wanted an investigation into all of the actions and failures that had led to the deaths of our loved ones and so many others on that horrible September day. Many people couldn't, or more likely didn't want, to hear the difficult questions regarding 9/11 that were emerging. But Bob Minetti listened and encouraged us to go to Washington, D.C. to ask for a comprehensive investigation. We learned that there was a stalled bill proposing the 9/11 Commission and decided to go and see if we could light a fire under the lawmakers to push forward with the legislation for an inquiry. Asking for an investigation into 9/11 became a full-time job. The four of us planned a rally in Washington, D.C. for June 11, 2001, 9 months after 9/11, to garner support for our cause. When seeking meetings in Washington, you are asked for the name of your organization. Thus, the four of us, Mindy Kleinberg, Patty Casaza, Kristen Breitweiser, and I, became the September 11th advocates. Soon, other victims' family members from other states began referring to us as the Jersey Girls. Before long, the press picked it up as well. Gail Sheehy wrote an article about us called 4 9/11 Moms Battle Bush that told our story and brought public attention to our plight. The group of us that would later become the 12 members of the Family Steering Committee for the 9/11 Commission had now loosely formed. And we learned to split up in order to meet with as many senators and congressmen as we could on a given visit to Washington. As the final language for a bill that would give us the 9/11 Commission was almost agreed upon, we began to notice a lot of foot dragging. Vice President Dick Cheney had clearly been against having an inquiry from the start and was working behind the scenes to keep things from moving forward. Cheney was often seen on TV with some scary reason for why we couldn't have an investigation into 9/11. One time, while we were all together in Representative Porter Goss's office, Goss got a phone call from Cheney telling him to keep negotiating with us. Goss looked flustered by that phone call, and we were beginning to learn how Washington worked. We finally got fed up with the intense runaround that we were getting, with everyone blaming everyone else for the delay. We couldn't take it anymore and asked Senator Lieberman, Democrat of Connecticut, to organize a meeting with all of the involved parties in one room. And to our surprise, he obliged. During that gathering, it became painfully apparent to everyone that it was the Bush-Cheney White House that was causing this stalemate. As the meeting wore on, and it appeared once again that there wouldn't be an agreement to the terms, all of the 9/11 family members that were in attendance stood up in solidarity, saying that we would not leave without an agreement on the legislation. The press was outside waiting to hear about the outcome, and the White House knew it. That was a critical moment and a turning point for us. Finally, the House passed a version of our legislation for an independent investigation. When the Senate voted on their version of the 9/11 Commission bill, we were invited to Washington to witness the event. As the Senate voted on the 9/11 Commission legislation, we were there cheering. Then we learned about conference committees, where the two houses of Congress would mesh the versions of the legislation that each had voted on. We wanted 2 years for the investigation, but got only 18 months. Initially, only $3 million was allotted, compared with $50 million allotted to investigating the Challenger explosion. We wanted subpoena power for each commissioner, but with pressure from the Bush-Cheney White House, there was an agreement made that would allow subpoena power only if the chair and vice chair, or at least 6 commissioners voted for it. This was a political body, split between 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans. Getting 6 commissioners to agree to answer a subpoena would have meant that one person had to jump over to the other side, which was highly unlikely. The commission legislation also gave guidance as to who would appoint the 9/11 commissioners. As per the legislation, President Bush got to choose who would head the commission. His first choice was Henry Kissinger. This news was getting some very negative press. Since Kissinger was informally known as the king of cover-ups, and we had fought long and hard for the creation of an independent investigation into the events of 9/11, this was unacceptable to most of us. Since Kissinger was tapped to head our commission, the Family Steering Committee asked to meet with him in his New York City office. A lot of research was done in preparation for that meeting, and we had learned that Kissinger and associates had some of the Bin Laden family members as their clients. Henry Kissinger didn't want to publicly reveal his client list, but we knew that all of the commissioners were required to do so. After some polite conversation, I felt compelled to ask him directly if he had any Saudi clients or any clients by the name of Bin Laden. After I asked my questions, he spilled his coffee and nearly fell off the couch. We'll never know exactly why, but the next day Kissinger resigned. President Bush then named Tom Kean, the former governor of New Jersey, as chairman of the 9/11 Commission, which was now taking shape. Various congressional leaders picked the balance of the commissioners. As we did our research, it became clear that all of the members that had been chosen for the commission had some conflict of interest. The first commission hearing was in March of 2003. Unbeknownst to us, our real work was just beginning. As watchdogs of the commission, the next 2 years of our lives were exhausting and exasperating as we battled the White House, Congress, the commission's executive director, Philip Zelikow, and at various times both with and against the 9/11 commissioners themselves on the various issues that arose. We fought along with the commissioners to get more money for the commission, to get an extension of time, to get access to important White House documents, and to get Condoleezza Rice to testify. We battled against the commissioners, trying to get them to subpoena recalcitrant witnesses and agencies, and were outraged when we learned they were using minders in interviews. We tried in vain to get them to fire their conflict-laden executive director, Philip Zelikow, and fought against allowing Bush and Cheney to testify together in a void with no transcript and no press. We let them know when they fell short of asking hard-hitting questions. We went to every open hearing, hoping that the commissioners would ask tough questions. I can recall only a few instances during the 12 public hearings that we were actually pleased with the vigor of questioning. As executive staff director of the commission, Philip Zelikow really ran the show, deciding what topics would be covered at the hearings and who would be called to testify. After some cursory research, we found out that in 1995, he and Condoleezza Rice had co-authored a book called Germany Unified and Europe Transformed, a study in statecraft. They had worked together in the first Bush White House and had both been members of the second Bush's transition team in 2000-2001. As our intense monitoring of the 9/11 Commission continued, we found that there were even more insidious conflicts surrounding Dr. Zelikow. In his work for President Bush's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, the PFIAB, Zelikow helped write the plans for the Iraq War. The Family Steering Committee immediately put out a press release. Quote, "It is apparent that Dr. Zelikow should never have been permitted to be executive staff director of the commission. As executive staff director, his job has been to steer the direction of the commission's investigation, an investigation whose mandate includes understanding why the Bush administration failed to prioritize the Al-Qaeda threat. It is abundantly clear that Zelikow conflicts goes beyond just the transition period." The press release went on to request Zelikow to the 9/11 families, or at least some of us, were hoping for a real investigation with scholars and experts in the appropriate fields and evidence to back up the work. We had wanted true independence from politics. We had fought so hard to get this commission and did not want someone who clearly had huge conflicts of interest to be running the investigation. But unfortunately, that's what we got. 10 years after the 9/11 attacks, the old questions still linger and new ones have arisen. A real investigation into 9/11 has never been done. This is incredible considering the direction that we have taken as a country. The passing of the Patriot Act, entering 2 wars, and our entire foreign policy has all been based on the official account of 9/11. The proper place for the 9/11 proceedings would be a courtroom with subpoena power, rules for swearing in witnesses, and establish protocols for handling questioning, cross-examination, and evidence. And ultimately, one would hope, real accountability for the actions that led to the deaths of so many. I want to thank you all for taking the time to gather together on this 10th anniversary in order to explore the issues and continue asking the questions that have never been answered regarding the events of September 11, 2001.
I define SCADs as concerted actions or inactions by government insiders intended to manipulate democratic processes and undermine popular sovereignty. All I did was looked at Iran-Contra, Watergate, Planegate, the manipulation of intelligence to get us into the Iraq War, and I said, what would we call this? What should be the name of this phenomenon? And that's how I came up with this concept, state crimes against democracy. It tells us a lot that we didn't have a name for it. These used to be called high crimes or treason, but those terms have lost currency. I want to say SCAD's not another name for conspiracy theory. Conspiracy theories are allegations, suspicions. They're suspicions that public officials themselves do not endorse. And basically they're saying unless this is investigated and confirmed by an official study, then it's a conspiracy theory. The SCAD concept is a type of crime. The conspiracy theories trying to get us not to talk about that type of study. That's what it amounts to. So by naming it, it's an important thing to name it in the sense that it gives us something to be specific about without being spurned and turned away by the conspiracy theory pejorative label. JFK, John Kennedy, and Robert Kennedy, both assassinated in the 60s. Both brothers assassinated while campaigning. Both JFK, John Kennedy, but nobody looked at that as a serial crime. Nobody said that. We don't say Kennedy assassinations. We say the Kennedy assassination. And what that means is the present. 9/11. We're looking at the events of 9/11, but we tend to look at 9/11 is connected to the anthrax letter attacks. I call this incident. It's a nearsightedness. I think of it as driven. We're like victims. We're like abuse victims. These shocking events are so overwhelming. They loom large in our minds, in our perceptions, and we can't see them as if we were above and looking at a bunch of them. We can only just see the one, and then we see the other. But it is the opposite of the way we think about most crimes. If there was a man who married a wealthy woman, and the woman died of a freak accident, and then he married another wealthy woman, and she died of a freak accident, we would say, this guy's killing his wives. We would certainly suspect that. We would interrogate it. We want to know, where were you when she died from the freak accident? It would be our automatic response. The TV shows on crime use this constantly. They will look for patterns in crimes to identify the suspect. It's a normal thing. It's criminology 101. And yet when we look at elite political crimes, we see them one at a time. Even when there are obvious connections, like the Kennedy assassination to the 2000 and 2004 election. Why do we do that? Well, I mentioned part of it is the abuse syndrome. Part of it, there's just powerful norms that prevent us from suspecting it. The fact is the political class ostracizes anybody who says such things. The clearest example of these norms is the conspiracy theory label and how it operates. Now, what's so peculiar about the conspiracy theory label is it doesn't make any sense. Okay, the idea of conspiracy being an irrational belief, the idea of conspiracy is a sound legal concept. We use it all the time. We prosecute gangsters in the United States for conspiring. Conspiracies happen. We know that. Iran-Contra, Watergate. So how can you have a concept that dismisses all conspiracies as improbable or impossible. It also doesn't make any sense. It's an unsubstantiated theory of its own. When people dismiss conspiracy theories, what they're doing is embracing a coincidence theory. They're assuming that all these things, yeah, they didn't catch the hijackers getting on the planes, and yeah, there was a group of elites who said we needed to have a new Pearl Harbor, and yeah, there were all these war games going on at the time, and yeah, the building stuff, all coincidental, all coincidences. So what's going on is you have an unsubstantiated theory that's being smuggled in.
What's the name?
And finally, it's based on a false premise. This idea that someone with the Manhattan Project, that he'll been in office for over we can keep secrets. We kept secret the decoding of the Japanese and German secret codes. That was kept secret all through the war. The idea that you can't keep secrets among large groups of people is just mistaken. All right, let's look at SCADs. I've got a list of 19 SCADs. These are political crimes and tragedies. Most are well documented. There are only a few that have been officially corroborated. Watergate, Iran-Contra, Colgate. They're industrial level operations. If you look at Watergate, for example, this wasn't a couple of burglars. They had two people in the hotel across the street watching. They had one person to pick the locks. They had one person to photograph the documents. They had one person to wiretap the phones. They had a whole crew of people. And it was a highly organized operation. So the difficulty in convicting people on this is often they don't know what their role is. They know what they did, but they don't know where it fits in the larger scheme of things. If you look at these skills and tactics, they're skills and tactics of military and intelligence professionals. And actually, that's some other work I've done. If you look at the development of them, you'll see that they tend to correspond with what we're doing in the international sphere. So we have a series of assassinations in the 60s. Well, at the same time, we were assassinating leaders internationally. So my suspicion is that these tactics tend to migrate back in to our domestic affairs. If you look at Watergate, Iran-Contra, and Iraq-Gate, just look at the trajectory of criminality. Watergate was basically a maniac, Nixon, wanting to get reelected. And he did implicate some other people and get them to go along with him, but they did reluctantly participate in that. He hired the plumbers because the FBI would not wiretap the news media. So you have people saying they won't go along. When you get to Iran-Contra, now you've got a part of the military and a big chunk of the CIA implicated. When you get to Iraq-Gate, now we're talking the Justice Department with the torture memos and the preemptive war memos. You're talking a big chunk of the military with its preemptive war and the CIA. So it's becoming much more pervasive. I think it's a frightening trend. Last thing I want to mention, some things about 9/11. It fits the SCAD pattern. I'm just listing some SCAD characteristics. Intersection of presidential politics and foreign policy. Obviously, the 2000 election had undercut the legitimacy of the Bush presidency, and that was turned around after 9/11. It furthered the war on terror. It involved military and intelligence skills with aviation and demolition. The crime scenes were investigated superficially with no check for explosives in the debris. Photographic evidence. The Pentagon, all the closed circuit TV videos were confiscated, and only one was released, which was of very poor quality. But there was also a set of photographs taken of 9/11, a helicopter flying above it. These photos did not come out until 2010. It took a Freedom of Information Act request through NIST to be able to get it. And they were really shocking because they showed so much dust and this kind of patterning that looks like explosives. There's a name for pyroclastic pattern. There's something peculiar about this label, 9/11. Now, this would have been a top priority for people. If somebody inside the government arranged this, they would want it to be framed in a certain way and would have been thinking about this. So I don't think this is out of the range of possibility. If it's a planted meme, it may have the characteristics of the conspiracy theory meme, which was empty, it's vague, but it's emotionally charged. It's conveyance of emotion, and it's foreign to the culture. If we look at 9/11, it's emotionally charged. It's connected to the emergency phone number 911. That itself is very suspicious, and I think that's the connection that if this was designed, was intended to do, and that it may have been time to be on that date to have that connection. 9/11 deviates from our naming conventions. We don't name holidays and events, frightening events, by the date. The only date I can think of that we have in America for a special date is July the 4th. But even that is Independence Day. Normally, we would name where the event happened, so Pearl Harbor, 3 Mile Island, or how it was done. So the anthrax letter attacks, for example, we use that way of naming. We would call 9/11 the hijacked airplane attacks. The problem normally with using 9/11 is it elevates the historical significance of the event. There's before 9/11 and there's after. And it immediately conveys this way of thinking. These are the kind of sciences I think we should try to expand. I've given you examples of them. I hope that you'll join with me in doing this, and I appreciate everybody letting me use all their material for my theorizing. Thank you.
Bring it on. Look at that.
In this presentation, I will speak of anomalies in the 9/11 Commission report. By anomalies, I mean features about and in this report that would not be expected on the assumption that the official account of 9/11 is true and the Commission was a truth-seeking body. After the 9/11 attack, one might have expected the U.S. Senate to have had an investigation or hearings analogous to the Senate's Watergate hearings to determine who was responsible for the attacks. But the Senate Majority Leader, Tom Daschle, acquiesced to an appeal by President Bush and Vice President Cheney that only the House and Senate Intelligence Committees look into the potential breakdowns among federal agencies that could have allowed the terrorist attacks to occur, rather than a broader inquiry that some leaders have proposed. Bush and Cheney made this request, they said, because a broader inquiry would take sources and personnel away from the war on terror. So the resulting joint inquiry, authorized in February 2002, did not inquire as to who was responsible for the attacks, but simply presupposed the truth of the claims made by the Bush-Cheney administration. There were continuing signs the Bush administration did not want the truth about 9/11 to be discussed. I will cite 5 pieces of evidence. First, Bush appointed Henry Kissinger to head the 9/11 Commission, leading the New York Times to ask whether this was not a clever maneuver by the White House to contain an investigation it long opposed. When Kissinger had to resign because he refused to name his clients, Bush appointed former New Jersey Governor Thomas Kean, who had no experience with Washington and national issues, and Representative Lee Hamilton, who had previously served as a Democrat covering up a Republican crime, and who had become friends with Cheney. The Bush White House also managed to get Philip Zelikow, a close friend of Condoleezza Rice, appointed as the executive director. 3. Bush promised only $3 million for the commission, whereas Ken Starr's investigation of President Clinton's affair with Monica Lewinsky had cost almost $30 million. In March of 2003, the commission asked for an additional $11 million, but the Bush administration turned the request down. Eventually, the commission was given $15 million. 5. Having declared that the commission must finish its work by May 2004, the Bush administration delayed authority clearances for some of the commissioners. Commissioner Max Cleland said the White House wants to run out the clock here, with the result that the commission would not begin work until the middle of 2003, leaving it with less than a year to finish its work. The Bush administration later did allow for a few more months. In their preface to the 9/11 Commission report, Kane and Hamilton said that the commission sought to provide the fullest possible account of the events surrounding 9/11. In truth, the report provided was a fairly complete report of all the events surrounding 9/11 that could be used to support the official account of the 9/11 attack. Evidence that some of the alleged hijackers, including Walid al-Shiri, said to have been on American Flight 11, which supposedly struck the World Trade Center's North Tower, were still alive after 9/11. The Associated Press reported that al-Shiri spoke on September 22nd to the U.S. Embassy in Morocco, explaining that he lived in Casablanca, working as a pilot for Royal Air Iraq. Defenders of the official account would later claim that this was a case of mistaken identity. But a 2001 BBC article entitled "Hijacked Suspect Alive in Morocco" made clear that the man of that name identified by the FBI as one of the hijackers was still alive. His photograph was released by the FBI and has been shown in newspapers and on television around the world. That same Mr. al-Shiri has turned up in Morocco, proving clearly that he was not a member of the suicide attack. He told Saudi journalists in Casablanca that he has now been investigated by the American authorities, who apologize for the misunderstanding. Nevertheless, the 9/11 Commission, writing as if none of this discussion occurred, endorsed the FBI's inclusion of al-Shiri with his photograph on the list of hijackers. The commission even said that al-Shiri was probably responsible for stabbing one of the flight attendants on American 11. The first page of the 9/11 Commission report says, among the air travelers on September 11 were Mohammed Atta and Abdul Aziz al-Omari, who arrived at the airport in Portland, Maine. Atta and Omari boarded a 6 a.m. flight from Portland to Boston's Logan International Airport. This story raises puzzling questions. Why was Atta in Portland the morning of the attack? Atta was not only purportedly the ringleader of the hijackers, but also the one assigned to be the pilot for American 11 after it was taken over. If the commuter flight had been delayed for an hour, as my flight was yesterday, he would have been too late to make the connection to American 11, just as I missed my connection yesterday. Why would he have taken such a risk? Both the 9/11 Commission and the FBI admitted that they had no answer to this question. According to the official story, in any case, Atta was already in Boston on September 11, but then took a rental car, a Nissan Altima, to South Portland, stayed overnight at the Comfort Inn, and then got to the Jetport in time to catch the 6 a.m. flight to Boston. Although Atta caught the American 11 flight, his luggage did not make it. And after the attack on the North Tower, his luggage at the Boston airport was opened, which contained much evidence, including Atta's will, that seemed to prove that the attacks had been carried out by Al-Qaeda. At least if one did not ask why Atta would have taken his will on a plane that he planned to crash into the World Trade Center. Stories in the mainstream press, including Newsweek and the San Francisco Chronicle, have reported that Muhammad Atta had engaged in behavior that undermined the portrayal of him as a devout Muslim. Behavior such as gambling, drinking alcohol, and enjoying lap dances. These reports were even pointed out in a Wall Street Journal editorial entitled Terrorist Stags Parties, which said several of the hijackers, including reputed ringleader Muhammad Atta, spent 200 to 300 each on lap dances in the Pink Pony Strip Club. Moreover, investigative reporter Daniel Hopsicker reported that while Atta was in Florida, he used cocaine and lived with a stripper. The 9/11 Commission report, however, does not mention any of these reports. It instead portrays Atta as not only religious, but even fanatically so. According to Professor Dietmar Marculi of Hamburg, who had been Atta's thesis advisor supervisor in the 1990s, Atta's full name, like his father's, was Muhammad Al-Amir Atta. And this young man was actually very religious. So much so that he prayed regularly, never touched alcohol, and would not even shake hands with a woman upon being introduced. Professor Marculi said, "I would put my hand on the fire that this Muhammad Al-Amir I know will never taste or touch alcohol." The Muhammad Al-Amir Atta that the professor knew was also described by him as very small, being